If this episode comes across as a little tense or low energy, it is.
Yeah, it is. You know why? Do you know why?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it's election day.
It's election day in the States. It's election day in these United States, which is something I have been avoiding completely today. I haven't been on social media except Messenger, and I'm not doing anything. I've
already
done my
voted,
duty.
right?
Oh yeah, a long time ago. I'm just sticking my head in the sand and just at this point I can do nothing. So
I literally can't because I have an assignment for sociology about the election.
No. The worst. Well,
I'm like, why have you done this to me?
You wrote to me and you were like, or you called me and you were like, can we not record today? And I'm like, let's just not think about voting for like 40 minutes. Let's instead think about The Color of Evil. The Dark Descent. That's right. We are talking about David G. Hartwell's The Dark Descent. See, I'm doing it before the end of the episode this time.
It's a miracle. Andrea can't be in the same room as us when we're listening to the podcast.
How come?
She hates your voice.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do.
She says it reminds her too much of the other voices I listen to.
What other voices do you listen to?
I listen to a lot of YouTube.
Oh. Do I sound like a YouTube boy?
I think that's part of why I like the YouTubers I like so much.
Aw. Is she like, is that Phil Gonzalez or Danny Gonzalez?
Who?
Danny Gonzalez. He's a YouTuber.
I don't know who that is. Is he?
he's a sweet boy. And he has a last name similar to mine. His last name is, he is a white presenting guy, just like I am, but one of his parents, I believe, is very like Latino. So yeah. I relate to him. He is much younger than I am and far more successful with millions of followers. So, But in any case,
maybe if we started a YouTube channel, we'd be super successful.
Nobody wants to look at me. Nobody wants to see my face.
I do. You're my dad.
Aww.
I have to see your face because I'm recording this podcast with you.
Because you see my face every time you look in a mirror.
I mean, kind of. I look more like my mom, though.
Sort of. I found a bunch of old photographs of myself from when I was like 7, 8, 9. And I don't think I look like either of my kids. But Are you ready to dive into the larger than oneself?
This was a weird story.
Wasn't it? Wasn't it not a horror story until the last like 4 pages?
Yeah, this was a weird story.
Yeah, I can't wait to do a deep dive into it. So, hey everyone, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro time. Robert Aickman. What'd you think of your first Robert Aickman tale?
Racist.
You thought he was racist? What aspect of it?
The part where he's referring to African people was racist.
Was it Robert Aickman, though, or the character, like, position? Because all the people in the story are a bit loathsome.
I don't know. It sounded like what year did he write this?
This originally appeared in 1966.
Then I'm going to assume it was him. It was just how he referred to them with the word. I don't know if he intended for it to be racist. It starts with, the lift, a Waywood Otis installation capacious enough for 12 at a hoist, was descending.
Oh, that term was fairly common, not in an offensive way.
Yes, I am aware, but it's still considered racist today.
Today it's considered racist, but he did not write it today. Okay, we're cleared up. 1966.
That's what I was trying to say.
1966, that was the accepted term. So, figured that. I was like, I don't remember him saying something horrific. Yes, okay. You're right. If this had been written today, I would be like, what are you talking about, my friend? my dude. But no, in 1966, that was the accepted term. A word still used in the names of several institutions. So Robert Aickman, it wouldn't surprise me if Robert Aickman had some less than charitable views. He was a British man born in 1914, and one thing that characterized Aickman was it was a traditionalist, I guess is a way to put it. Like he was a preservationist, is how they say. So he not only wanted to preserve the countryside, he also kind of wanted to preserve everything. Like nothing should change. Everything's just fine the way it is. By the way, I'm white and British.
And also a man.
And a man. So yeah. And this week we're touching on the story Larger Than One's Self by Robert Aickman, 1966. It originally appeared in The Powers of Darkness, a collection of his short stories. And Robert Aickman was known for being a preservationist and known for being a writer of weird fiction. Most of his stories, many of his stories actually, are those ones where you're like, was there even anything supernatural in this, or is it just implied? But I think in this one, it's more than just implied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell the world what exactly this story is about?
It's about a woman named Mrs. Iblis who gets invited to some dude's party, except for she wasn't invited.
Well, she was uninvited, but she didn't get the uninvitation soon enough, which is embarrassing. Yeah. Can you imagine going to a party and you show up and they're like, "Ooh, you know what? You were invited, but I guess you didn't get the retraction of the invite. You can still stick around though."
Well, how rude that would be.
Yeah. What kind of party is it though?
A religious party?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
A cult party.
Thrown by a guy named Vincent Kohner, who's like just kind of this rich, like ne'er-do-well who is like, he owns a bunch of newspapers. He's just kind of bored, and so he's trying to bring together like all the great leaders of religion and mysticism and philosophy to try to find out like what the kind of put their heads together and figure out just what everything means. Like, what's the point of everything? We're all searching for something, as they repeatedly say throughout, larger than oneself.
I feel like that's not true.
Who is not true?
What?
What's not true?
That we're all searching for something larger than oneself.
Yeah. What do you think we're all searching for?
Nothing. I don't think anyone's searching for anything except for satisfaction in day-to-day life.
Well, clearly the characters in the story are searching for something larger than oneself. That's what they all keep saying. They're trying to synthesize like everything that they've learned to like, I don't know, just figure everything out in this one evening, I guess. It's not the first one of these things he's done. But yeah, this woman, is it Iblis?
I think it's,
Iblis?
I have no idea. Iblis?
Iblis?
Iblis.
IBLIS.
Momento, por favor. Pronunciation.
Iblis. All right, then. It's an Islamic term that refers to Satan.
Yeah.
If that means anything in the story. I don't know if that actually means anything in this story, but it's definitely a chosen term. He definitely chose to name this woman after the Islamic name for like the devil or Satan or the great adversary. So she doesn't come across as particularly satanic, however.
No.
Yeah, no.
Why was she invited in the first place?
If I remember correctly, it was because she was like part of another group that he was going to have, but then he changed his mind and like redid the guest list, because she's not the only one. This guy Stillman shows up as well, and this girl Ruth, and they're also not on the guest list anymore.
I thought Ruth was invited.
I can't figure out the relationship between Kohner and Ruth. She's young. He puts his hands all over her. He's married, but he keeps like touching Ruth and hanging out with her. It's a weird place. So we have these main characters. We have Kohner, we have Kohner's wife, we have Mrs. Iblis, we have Stillman, we have Ruth, and then we have Mavis, who's Kohner's assistant, and Sister Nooper, who is the dietary advisor to the party, to the guests, and she is rooming with Mrs. Iblis. In this, it's like in a mansion. So there's all these rooms, everyone's staying overnight, and most of the story is Mrs. Iblis sort of roaming around this party talking to different people about like their beliefs. And when I say most of the story, I mean like 85 to 90% of the story is that.
Yeah, it does give me a feeling of dread because I don't like parties or being surrounded by people I don't know.
Well, and it's definitely that thing where everyone treats her like she was not invited and that she's not necessarily a welcome guest at this party.
Yeah. Why did they have them stay? I just don't understand that.
Well, obviously because this whole thing is like supposed to go like way into the night. I think it's just one of those things where like you're going to be here until like 5 a.m. anyway. So here's a room for you to crash in when this is all done with.
Why didn't they just say, "Oh, sorry, you were uninvited. See you later"?
Mrs. Iblis? I think because everyone's like just kind of awkward about it. I mean, what would you do if someone went out of their way and like traveled all the way to your mansion, and then you're like, ooh, yeah. So they put her up, I think, because they're not gonna like throw her out into the rain.
I'd pay for their ticket back.
Well, she ends up talking to this young woman named Ruth, who like quizzes her on being an Anglican, which is weird. She meets a Swiss guy named Professor Borgia, who's really proud of being a descendant of the Borgias, who talks a lot about respecting language, respecting words. And Ruth is talking all about sin and the difference between like sin and wickedness. And then there's this guy who's like, who talks a lot about like the new spiritual revival and man's quest for something larger, and that you have to give your soul in order to get anything out of life. Like and then everyone keeps talking about how important the Salvation Army is to all this. And Mrs. Nooper spends the whole time surrounded by a bunch of young men who eventually she leads off into the woods, and it's really just like, what are they getting up to out there? There's like New Agers. There's one guy, O'Rourke, talks about how the devil is actually really tiny. And
like that episode of Buffy.
Which episode of Buffy?
There's an episode of Buffy. It's a Halloween episode where they go to a party. I think it's a frat house.
Uh-huh.
And they decorated with all these symbols, and the demon turns everything in the house real.
Oh, right, right.
And then the demon finally gets summoned. It's like this big, and Buffy just steps on it at the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of this like bandying about of ideas. There's just a lot of like talk. And Mrs. Iblis has to go to her room at one point, but then she gets bored, and so she comes back down, and by the time she comes back down, it's really late. She
doesn't get bored, she wakes up.
Yeah, and most of the food is now gone.
Mm-hmm.
So she gets some cake from the caterers.
And some lobster salad.
That's right. They're like, she goes to the caterers and she's like, is there any food left? They're like, ugh, yeah, there's lobster salad. And they're really put off that like one of the guests wants something. Right. And then they bring out the cake, but the cake gets taken away, unfortunately, which is sad. I was really sad when the cake got taken away.
She got 2 slices, though.
She did get 2 slices. Oh, and she also drinks Mr. Koner's homemade alcoholic cider, which gets her a little lightheaded. Then Koner comes in, he like comes on to her in a weird way. He starts talking about like the subconscious mind, that we're all trying to find ourselves, trying to find something larger than ourselves. And that's when Mrs. Nooper goes off with all the guys, the 12 men who are following her, and she walks off.
Everyone gets really offended when Iblis asks about that. Iblis.
Oh yeah, like where'd they go off to? And they're like, I'm like, is it sexy times? Is it like religious times? Who knows? Mrs. Nooper seems fine with it. Who knows? We don't know anything about her business. I do want to point out that even though all the talk is very like religious and heady, it's very well written. It never lost my interest. But at one point I was like, is the horror supposed to be that like we're just supposed to be uncomfortable that she's at this boring party? Like I was like,
no, there's going to be a giant light that comes from the sky and kills everybody.
Yeah, so she goes back to bed, and when she wakes up, Mavis, who is Mr. Koner's assistant, comes bursting in, and she's like, there's a problem. and Mrs. Iblis is like, what's going on? And Mavis is like, the light in the sky. And what's the light in the sky really?
No idea.
So she's like, what? It's just the moon. And she's like, no. Mavis is like, this is my favorite. She's like, I do the composting. So I know where the moon is because I do it by a lunar cycle. And we're like, all right, brag.
Who does their compost by a lunar cycle?
#compost brag. Yeah, I know, but it's like she's like, I know where the moon's supposed to be. That ain't the moon. And she's like, well, what is it then? Is it like a bonfire? What is it? And she's like, no, look out into and so they go downstairs, and all the guests are in the pajamas, and they're all gathered in the foyer.
Pajamas.
The door is open, and this bright light is shining through. And like one by one, they all want to take a look, but they're all freaked out by it. Mr. Stillman shows up, and he's like,
I like Stillman.
Yeah, he's the only he's Jewish, and he's not like the weird new age synagogue that they were trying to get. Like there was this rabbi they were trying to get to the party, and they couldn't get him, and they're like, No,
they got him. He just had an argument with Stillman.
Oh, is that what it was? That's right. That's right. He left. Yeah, Stillman is totally pragmatic. He's a businessman. He's like the level-headed one, and he's like, they're all going to go outside. Let's go up to the roof and we can get a good look at whatever is up in the sky. And what is it up in the sky?
Something.
It's just this. All it really says is it's a vast shining figure. It says it's a shape that reminds Iblis of the feet of the gods on the mountain, and it fills the sky. Like the shape just fills the entire sky, and all the invited guests go outside, and they're huddling in the face of this giant light. And then Mrs. Iblis passes out, and when she
looks at it first, though.
Oh yeah, what does it say?
It says, Mr. Stillman had placed his forearms on the railing round the roof. Mavis had sunk her head between her knees. It was only Mrs. Iblis who looked upwards, and what she saw nearly finished her.
Yeah, what she saw nearly finished her. I love that. It's so, like, vague. And she faints, and when she comes to, what has happened to all of the guests?
They're gone.
It says they have merged to be never to be seen again. They have merged, which is somehow worse than disappearing or being killed. Like, I don't know what Stillman saw happen, but I imagine them all just kind of melting together and then being like sucked up into the figure, like through a straw, just like.
Ugh, why?
Yeah. I don't know, because they all merge into like a goo and then they all get sucked up.
I imagine them like disintegrating, and merged was just a spiritual term.
Oh, I see. Turning into like light or something, or dust, whatever it wasn't good. And the only people left are Stillman, Mavis, Coner, and then Mrs. Nooper comes in with her followers, and they look great. They're just all disheveled and covered in mud.
I like to think that they're werewolves.
Well, maybe. It does say that when they return that when we find it, I like this part. Let's see, they have merged. Mrs. Nooper dropped into the armchair. Her eyes were filled with such happiness that Mrs. Iblis was thoroughly scared all over again. Her eyes were filled with such happiness. Her face was glittering in a way Mrs. Iblis did not like. Like, that's wild. And then Mrs. Iblis...
it should be...
What?
It should be made clear that we never actually get confirmation if that is Sister Nooper.
How do you mean?
She just assumes it is, but we never get actual confirmation that it is.
Oh, really? I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. It does get pointed out. I mean, people have pointed out in commentaries that, Jesus had 12 apostles, 12 disciples. And Mrs. Nooper has 12 disciples. That's just something to think about. We have Mrs. Iblis, who's named after the devil. Is she supposed to be the devil's bride because she's Mrs. Devil, or something else?
Mrs. Devil.
Mrs. the Devil.
Then who's Stillman?
Who is Stillman?
Stillman is God.
Is he? I mean, he's the only like level-headed one. So one commentator on this story talks about like Sister Nooper and her disciples, like kind of may represent like sensuality, like the sensualists who are all about like base desires, and Stillman represents the intellectual, who's like who only believes in what you can see, which parallels Aickman's idea that, quote, the human mind is a whale. It's all there inside you. Enormous, unknown things, difficult to reach. And woe betide the man who looks outside himself for what he can only find outside. That is surely one thing which modern psychology has made clearer than ever. The subconscious mind, so much larger than the conscious, the subliminal self. And then we have Iblis and Mavis, who represent the ordinary, who this commentator said, whom all this metaphysical talk just gives a headache. And then we have the spiritualists who want something larger than themselves. And the irony at the ending of the story, of course, being that they accidentally get it. And
then there's Coner.
And what is Coner? He's just kind of a loser.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just kind of this nothing. Like, he doesn't get anything at the end. Is he there when the light shows up? Is he there when the light shows up, though?
No.
Yeah, he doesn't even get to see what he set up this whole party for. He just loses out on everything. It's so wild.
He gets drunk.
Yeah, and his wife is just passed out in her bedroom.
I thought his wife died.
Does she? I thought she was like out like a light because Mavis comes in and she's like, Mrs. Conner is unconscious. She took her pills.
Oh, yeah, must have been. I must have misread that then.
So they invited all these people. These people got together and they were like, we want something larger than ourselves. And then in the middle of the night, something way larger than themselves shows up and dissolves them and absorbs them. And then they're gone. And I don't know if the story is basically like Aickman saying like the ultimate horror is to actually know what's going on. But it's definitely a very cosmic horror.
Mm-hmm.
Like a weird cosmic horror in a way that like I don't think even H.P. Lovecraft ever achieved.
I wouldn't necessarily. I think it was scarier before anything else happened, just because of my personal feelings.
Uh-huh.
Also, just like the idea of dissolving and being absorbed as light isn't that scary to me.
Aw, well, good, because I have really good news for you then. Oh no. You couldn't see it, but Willow just mimed shooting me with a shotgun through the screen. I think that's a federal offense.
I was mostly doing that as like a laser gun, but I couldn't get the other noises correct.
No, you cocked the gun. You went.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know, but I couldn't figure out how to do a laser gun. So I just did the thing that I could do.
Or
well, if you want to press charges, you have video evidence.
I do have video evidence. And that's the story. Just this weird ending to this tale. Larger than, I mean, that's what happens. Is it horror? Is this really a horror story? It's weird.
It's horror to me. If I ever showed up to a place and someone was like, "Oh, we actually uninvited you, but you can stay the night anyways," I would kill myself.
It says in Hartwell's intro, he talks about Aickman being master of the ghost story, a theoretician, an editor, and a writer who never attained recognition really on the worldwide stage. But Larger Than Oneself is an ironic reinterpretation of the moral tale for our era.
How is this at all a moral tale?
Well, it says that Mrs. Iblis spends the weekend at a convention of people interested in the supernatural, the metaphysical, and the occult, and finds it uniquely disturbing. An interesting example of the blend of all three is an interesting example of the blend of all three major streams of horror fiction. The three streams of horror fiction, which are the moral allegorical, the psychological metaphor, and the fantastic. So I guess like as a moral allegory, yeah, because you're seeing this representation of these different points of view coming together to try to figure out, you know, like what the meaning of life is. A psychological metaphor, people longing for something greater than themselves, who then are confronted by that very thing. And then the fantastic, which is the light showing up in the sky. So yeah, you've got like these three major threads running through this story, and yeah, and it actually just discussed the nature of evil, the nature of sin, the nature of wickedness. Mm-hmm. So what was the question I never answered?
How is it a moral tale? But you answered it, so it's okay.
I did answer it. Would it surprise you to know that when he first published his story, the book cost 18 / because I don't know how that means. I don't know how British money worked back in the 1960s. So it says price 18 / and when it was reprinted, it was 5 / So who knows? I don't know old British money. Thank God they changed their currency. Yeah, it originally appeared in Powers of Darkness and in Painted Devils, Strange Stories, and then finally in The Dark Descent. Like that was like its big collection was it's big when it was included in this. So good on you, Robert Aickman. I got a bunch of recommendations for other Aickman stories to pursue. They're like, yeah, Larger Than Oneself is interesting, but really good ones are. And then people like listing like X, Y, and Z. Final thoughts on Larger Than Oneself?
Cool.
Who was your favorite character?
Stillman.
Stillman? I think Stillman, too. He seemed like the only one who I wouldn't mind having a conversation with.
Honestly.
Yeah. What is next in The Color of Evil?
We have Belsen Express by Fritz Leiber.
Fritz Leiber. Yep, friend of a buddy of H.P. Lovecraft. Fritz Leiber, who's written quite a few things. In fact, did we cover the movie Night of the Eagle?
Yes.
About the man who
the one that has the eagle statue in it.
Yes.
That gets shot from different angles. Yeah.
I believe that's based on a Fritz Leiber story. Yep. Conjure Wife by Fritz Leiber, which I read for, Night of the Eagle, also known as Burn Witch Burn. By Fritz Leiber. So we actually have discussed Fritz Leiber before. So this will be a return to, and I found that book was a blast. So I'm looking forward to reading this story just because I know that I like his writing style. He's funny. He's got a good. I don't know if the story's gonna have any humor in it, but he's got a good head on his shoulders. That Leiber.
I'm gonna throw up.
Well, all right. On that note, we'll see you hopefully next week with some Fritz Leiber, The Belsen Express.
And maybe we won't.
And maybe we won't. Maybe we'll be dead in a ditch somewhere. And in any case, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when
it's Del Toro time.